this episode,
A bone-chilling glass of beer.
tapping into the history of naming beer.
Also Prosit, meine Lieben.
From the giant macro breweries to the scrappy micros that have brought us their wild flavors and off-the-wall names.
Moosterol's a really interesting name for a beer.
I'm gonna try the Smiling Dickhead.
They came out with a beer called Optical Illusion, and it's got a crazy label.
Microbrewer John Graham takes cues from the past as he launches a brand new beer.
We only got one chance to name the beer, the same as you only have one chance to get the recipe right.
And along the way, he gets some help from the biggest beer fan in television.
Oh! I don't really have the words to describe how that tasted other than yummy.
And the Trailer Park Boys.
I mean, I'm really hungover right now, and I haven't eaten today, and this is actually pretty good.
You're an alcoholic, though.
That is true.
As we look to the past to find out what's in a name. Years ago, John Graham left city life and moved to a small town to start his own craft brewery, Church Key Brewery. Like any growing business, profit margins are low. He needs to come up with new blends that appeal not just to his regulars,
Hey, Eric. Hey, John.
but the rich city drinker.
Naming a beer is important. It's how the beer's judged before the bottle's even open.
So there's a lot riding on the name of his newest offering of handcrafted beer. It could either land him in the elite club of successful brewers or get his new brew booed off the shelves. Historically, beer names were not all that imaginative. Many, like Creemore and Pilsner Urquell, got their names from the brewery location or from the owner like Molson and Guinness. But then came the hippies in the 1970s. Many went back to the land to grow their own food and brew their own beer. That microbrewery movement grew into the so-called craft beer renaissance in the 80s and 90s, and that's when beer names got interesting.
When it comes to naming, craft brewers have a lot more flexibility and freedom to market the way they want to.
They're not hand-tied by these focus groups into making generic-style beer to appeal to generic-style people.
From his holy headquarters built into an old Methodist church in the countryside of Campbellford, Ontario, today, John is on a mission. Online, the Canadian public has been suggesting names for John's new brew. Thousands of ideas have been whittled down to 5, and John has asked his employees to help him pick the final one.
Hey guys, I got the 5 names.
Oh, sweet. I can't wait to hear these.
Thy Neighbor's Wife, The Great Gatsby, Hair of the Dog, Genghis Khan, Resurrection.
This one's kind of just clear.
But it doesn't say, like, that much at all.
What's it supposed to say? It's the name of a beer.
We've been brewing and drinking beer as far back as 9,000 years ago, long before the invention of the wheel. For generations, beer was identified only by color, flavor, strength, and ingredients, and beer wasn't called anything except the house brew. Beer names didn't arrive until the Industrial Revolution and the invention of the beer bottle in 1850. With it came mass marketing, preservatives, and newfangled transportation. The beer industry was born, so names help customers tell one brewski from another.
Present, I'm Jack Daniel.
Inside the Church Key Brewery, John could use some divine inspiration to choose the right name. Things could go very wrong if you look at some of the names that came before him.
To celebrate 2 million years of walking upright on this planet, there's a beer out there called Homo erectus.
As soon as you have a redneck thinking he's putting anything even close to an erection near his mouth, he's not going to drink it. Exactly.
It was Splugen. Now, there are 2 umlauts over the U, so I think it's pronounced Splugen. And people go, what does it taste like? She goes, it tastes like Splugen. So maybe that's a good name for a beer, but it's a horrible beer.
There were 2 brewers in the US who both released a beer called Salvation, and they got together and instead of suing each other, they decided to blend the 2 beers together and call it collaboration, not litigation.
Not a name that rolls off the tongue, but at least the microbreweries teamed up. Not the case for Budweiser. In 1876, Budweiser was launched in the United States. It's an American beer, but the name refers to someone from the Czech city of Budvar. Trouble is, that city also brews a beer called Budweiser.
Budweiser was trademarked in the US, but then they tried to move into Europe, and Budvar is saying you can't move in there. Then Budvar from Europe is trying to move into the US, and they're saying you can't move in here.
It's been more than a century, and lawyers are still wrestling over the dispute. The beer customer is worth fighting for. Beer is the most widely consumed drink in the world, after water and tea. And it's all about creating a winning combination of 4 main ingredients: barley, hops, yeast, and water. Church Key has 3 regular brews on the shelves: an ale, a pale ale, and a Scotch ale. But John's new one is brewed in what's called the Bière de Garde style. That's higher in alcohol content, ingredients, and flavor.
I would say I'm on somewhat of a mission to just educate people on trying different beers and expanding their palates.
One of the men responsible for creating the Canadian beer palate was John Labatt. He arrived in Canada from Ireland in 1897. 50 years later, he introduced a Czech-style lager called Labatt's Pilsner.
But in Winnipeg, they helped sponsor the local Blue Bombers games. I think the guy who emceed for the Blue Bombers games was also a flack for Labatt's. He kept sort of emphasizing the Blue Bombers, Blue Label, Blue Bombers, Blue Label.
The fans really got on board with it very quickly and just started referring to the beer as Labatt Blue.
So in 1956, the label was changed to Labatt's Blue. By the way, there's no law that first names must be John, but you would know it from John Labatt. John Molson, John Sleeman, and Thomas Carling, succeeded by his son, John. So John Graham may have the right name, but what about his beer? When we come back, some help from a guy who knows a thing or two about brews. Which one of the 3 beers is named after a location? Stella Artois, Lowenbrau, or Grolsch? Find out after the break. Between Stella Artois, Lowenbrau, or Grolsch, Grolsch is the only beer named after a location, the Dutch city of Grol. Stella means star in Latin, named because it was originally a Christmas beer, and Artois is the name of the original brewer. Lowenbrau means lion's brew, which is thought to refer to the brewer's family crest. Back at Church Key Brewery, John Graham has named his beer after the county where he lives, like Northumberland Ale, and his church, like Holy Smoke Scotch Ale. Some have literary pun names like the Scarlet Pilsner. But what will he name his newest beer? Will it be Thy Neighbor's Wife, The Great Gatsby, Genghis Khan, Hair of the Dog, or Resurrection?
Craft beer industry names its beers a little bit funky, a little bit off the wall because they can.
John's not only a brewer, he runs a local pub that stocks his best sellers. His severest critics are his customers, and waiting inside is the ultimate beer connoisseur, actor George Wendt, who played the beer-loving Norm Peterson on the TV show Cheers.
Hi, George. Thank you for coming out.
Thanks, John.
How are you?
Good. Love the place.
Thank you.
I think I'm a little bit more discriminating in person than Norm.
So what we're going to do is I'm going to pour you 5 different beers.
Okay.
And we're going to see if you can pick out which is the one brewed by Church Key. And if it's all right with you, this is going to be a blind tasting. So,
okay.
Shelley, could you come up here?
Is that good? Can you see?
Yep. No, I mean, it's working.
4 of the beers are from well-known breweries, and 1 is John's newest craft beer.
All right. Next. Am I done?
You are done. That is all 5.
I'm thinking this is the one.
You are correct.
We wanted to just really hit home the point just how different the flavor between macro and micro can be.
I don't really have the words to describe how that tasted other than yummy.
Yeah, very good.
So we know that John has a winning beer. All he needs now is a winning name. His first choice on the list of 5 comes from a long line of beer names inspired by sin. Thy Neighbor's Wife.
Kind of risky. It's kind of dirty.
It's going to cause fights.
for sure.
In beer, there's also a long history of naming beer brands after the devil. So there's Duvel, there's Lucifer. I would be shocked if there isn't a beer called Mephistopheles out there.
Another sinful name is 420.
Mac has managed to get himself stoned.
420 was shorthand for the time of day students would meet outside to smoke pot. And today, 420 on April 20th has become an international time to light up.
See, it's a pot story, it's not a beer story.
Inspired by its own illegal heritage, Utah has a porter-style beer called Polygamy Porter.
And I think the tagline of Polygamy Porter is probably the quintessential ad line that you could ask for a marketing campaign. And the tagline is, why have just one?
Who drinks a funky name craft beer anyway?
These pipe guys with, you know, comb-over hairdos and sort of like trad jazz records and that sort of thing. And I think there was sort of a kind of a leftover hippie audience as well.
What about a cheaper generic beer?
There are working men's beer. There are the deep discounted, served to you by a girl in a tank top, chicken wing eating, football watching, draft beer, pitcher special beers.
So if you're in a regular bar and you go for the blue instead of, say, the Heineken even, I think they're going to expect less of a tip.
But back to John's list of 5 names. His second choice? Genghis Khan, named after the murderous ruler of the Mongol Empire from the 13th century.
It's big, it's ballsy, it's got some Genghis Khan characteristics. Because if you called it Gandhi, you know, I think the beer would be a bit more zen, maybe like a brunch beer.
When I think beer, I don't think Genghis Khan. He's more like fermented yak's milk or something like that.
Maybe you're demonstrating your virility, your masculinity, but I'm not so sure it would be as appealing to the female segment.
Who says beer is a man's beverage? Women like...
It's true that beer is marketed as a man's drink. Sports, cowboys, big animals, they've all been used to sell men beer.
Nobody makes more liquor like Slip. Look out for the bull.
You know, we're focusing on a very specific demographic in the population, and that is legal drinking age to about 25-year-old male. And the way you connect with those individuals is by putting bouncing bikini babes in the mountains.
We like beer. Beer with our lunch, with dinner too. And with our knitting.
The few lame attempts to market to women usually focused on light beer or worse, feminine beer.
There was a brewery, I think, called Beautiful Beer in Florida, and they launched a beer called Honey Amber Rose, and it was trademarked as the first beer for women, and it was brewed with clove honey and hibiscus. I don't know, last I heard they were selling that trademark, so I don't know how well that went.
So who's to say a lady wouldn't enjoy the occasional Genghis Khan?
Oh, yeah, fine.
And it's not the only beer named after a notorious man. The microbrew Old Rasputin pays tribute to the famous mad monk and notorious lover of the Russian Tsarina at the turn of the 20th century.
Rasputin's penis is on display at the Smithsonian, and it's gigantic. You know?
It's a nice piece of history right there.
Thanks, Mark.
And John hopes that history, plus a divine intervention, will guide him in choosing the right name for his new beer. Which country drinks the most beer per capita? Ireland, the Czech Republic, or Germany? The answer when we come back.